I'm the youngest of 4 kids, but not by a little bit. There's a 6-year gap between me and my next sibling. Growing up, it always felt like I was invisible. My siblings had their own issues, and my parents probably thought that since I wasn't sick or dealing with mental health stuff like they were, I didn't need them. I'm not trying to make it sound tragic or anything, it's just how things were. My siblings were always in and out of hospitals, in therapy sessions, or dealing with some crisis. And me? I was just there, the glass child, I guess. People could see me, but no one really noticed. I spent a lot of time on my own, reading, playing video games, whatever I could do to entertain myself since no one else was around to do it. To be fair, my parents didn't make me take care of my siblings or anything. I've heard stories of people having to sacrifice their childhoods to raise their brothers or sisters, but that wasn't me. My parents handled all the care stuff themselves, but because I wasn't in crisis mode like my siblings, I think I just slipped through the cracks. I didn't need help, so I didn't get any. It's not like my parents did this on purpose. When you've got 3 kids constantly dealing with health problems, the one who's healthy becomes an afterthought. They were always busy with hospital visits, doctor appointments, and school meetings for my siblings, so I became the kid who didn't cause trouble and didn't get attention. I was invisible, but not in a movie kind of way. It was just a practical, we're overwhelmed kind of thing. I wasn't completely alone, though. When I was about 10, I met 2 friends, Sarah and Emily. They were in similar situations, families that were too distracted to notice them much either. The 3 of us just clicked, and we became inseparable. Sarah and Emily became more like my family than my actual family ever did. We stuck together through school, college, and eventually, we moved out of state together after graduation. We created our own little makeshift family out of what our real families couldn't provide. My relationship with my parents didn't really change when I left home. We didn't talk much, which wasn't surprising since we never talked much when I lived there either. My mom would text me sometimes, small talk stuff like, "How's work?" or "How's school?" But it was always surface level. Honestly, that was an improvement from high school when we barely talked at all. Then last year, a few days before Thanksgiving, my mom called out of nowhere. We never called each other, so I immediately thought something was up. The last time we'd spoken on the phone was probably a year earlier when she told me about my sister's funeral arrangements. So yeah, we didn't exactly have regular conversations. Anyway, she calls and asks what time I'm coming home for Thanksgiving, and I'm sitting there like, what? I didn't even know they were doing anything for Thanksgiving. My family never really had big holiday traditions, and I could count on one hand the number of times we'd even tried to do Thanksgiving or Christmas. I told her I already had plans. I was going on a ski trip with Sarah and Emily. I couldn't just drop everything and come over, even if I wanted to. Plus, I lived 2 states away, and booking a last-minute plane ticket was out of the question. But she acted like I was being difficult. She started guilt-tripping me, saying she'd be all alone because my dad was visiting my brother at the facility he's in. I understood, really, but she gave me 3 days' notice and expected me to drop everything and show up. I told her I couldn't, and she got mad, saying I didn't care about the family. After that, she hung up on me. I sat there for a while, feeling guilty, but also kind of pissed. They hadn't reached out to me in forever, and now suddenly, I was the bad guy for not coming home? I scrolled through our old texts to make sure I hadn't missed anything, but nope, nothing about Thanksgiving or wanting to see me. She just expected me to be a mind reader or something. Later that night, I sent her a text saying I couldn't make it for Christmas either because of my ski trip, but I'd love to catch up with her and Dad after the new year. You know, trying to be nice about it. She didn't reply. A few days later, I was still trying to shake off the weird feeling from that call. You know that nagging feeling when something just doesn't sit right? That's how I felt about my mom trying to make me feel bad for not coming home. But by then, I had moved on. I was getting ready for my trip, and honestly, I was excited. The 3 of us hadn't had a real vacation in forever. Then, out of the blue, I get a text from my dad. He hardly ever texts me, so I figured it must be important. But instead of something reasonable, he hit me with, "If you don't come home for Christmas, I'm cutting off your college funds." I laughed. I graduated 3 years ago. What payments? It was so out of left field that I had to read it twice. I thought maybe he was confused, so I texted back, reminding him that I had already graduated, and if he thought he was still paying for college, He should check his bank account because someone must be scamming him. I figured that would be the end of it. But nope. A few hours later, I got another text, this time accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. He went on about how they had sacrificed so much for me and my siblings, and how I didn't appreciate any of it. First of all, I never asked for anything from them. Second, I didn't even know they were paying for my college because my grandma had covered everything. She made it clear she didn't want my parents involved in my education, so she took care of it. I had no idea what my dad was even talking about. At this point, I was getting annoyed. I understood that my parents were probably stressed with everything going on with my siblings, but guilt-tripping me over stuff they hadn't even done was too much. I texted him back, being as polite as possible, and said something like, "I'm sorry you feel that way, but Grandma paid for my college. I'd be happy to catch up after the holidays, but I already have plans." I thought that would shut it down. But no, my dad went full drama mode. He sent a long message about how I had abandoned the family, how I was turning my back on them, and how he was done helping me if I didn't start making an effort. I just stared at my phone, stunned. Abandon the family? I'd been living on my own for years, and they barely noticed. Now, because I wouldn't rush back for Christmas, I was the villain. I wanted to just ignore it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. They hadn't spoken to me in months, hadn't asked how I was doing, but the second they needed something, I was supposed to be their backup plan? I called Sarah and Emily to vent about it, and they both said the same thing. It sounded like my parents were just trying to guilt-trip me. Sarah thought they wanted me home so they wouldn't feel bad about themselves, not because they actually wanted to see me. Emily, being her usual blunt self, said, "Screw them. You don't owe them anything." I decided to sleep on it and cool off before replying to my dad's last text, but as I was lying there, my phone buzzed again. It was my dad. This time, the message was short and cold. "If you don't come home, don't bother coming back at all." I stared at the message, feeling numb. How had we gone from not talking for months to this, to disowning me over not coming home for Christmas? It didn't even feel real. I wanted to fire back, to tell them everything I'd been holding in for years, all the times they ignored me, all the times I felt like I didn't exist in that house. But instead, I just put my phone down and didn't respond. I didn't want to get dragged into their drama right before the holidays. I didn't want to deal with the guilt trips, the accusations, or whatever else they were going to throw at me. So I let it go. The next day, I woke up to more texts, this time from my mom. She didn't say much, just that they were disappointed in me, that they didn't understand why I was being so distant, and that they hoped I'd change my mind. I couldn't help but laugh a little. Distant? That didn't even begin to cover it. I had been distant my whole life, and now they were just noticing? I ignored the texts again and focused on getting ready for the ski trip. Sarah and Emily were pumped, and honestly, I was too. It felt like the perfect escape from all the family nonsense. We hit the road the next day, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about my parents. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I just felt free. Of course, it didn't last. Just when I thought I could finally move past it, I got another message from my mom, right in the middle of the trip. She wasn't giving up. This time, she said that if I didn't come home soon, they'd have to start making decisions about the future without me. Decisions that I wouldn't like. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about Christmas. They weren't pushing me to come home because they missed me or wanted to spend time together as a family. They were planning something bigger, something long-term, and they needed me back in the fold for it. Maybe it had to do with one of my brothers or the house. Whatever it wasn't about me. Not really. It was about what they could get from me. That realization hit me like a punch in the gut. For years, I thought I was being selfish, that maybe I was the problem. But now I saw it for what it was. They weren't concerned about me. They never had been. They were concerned about their own lives and what I could do for them. I was done being their backup plan. After that trip, I figured things would calm down. I ignored their texts, focused on my life, and tried to remind myself that I wasn't responsible for their problems. But of course, it wasn't that simple. One afternoon, after I'd gotten back home and settled into my routine, I got a message from my older brother, James. Now, James and I hadn't spoken in months, maybe even longer. Growing up, He was the one sibling I thought might understand me. He wasn't as sick as the others, and I always figured we could have had something more. But James was wrapped up in his own world, and we never really connected. So seeing his name pop up on my phone surprised me. His message was short. "We need to talk." I didn't know what he wanted, but I wasn't in the mood for more family drama. I texted back, "About what?" A few minutes later, my phone rang. I hesitated for a second, but then picked it up, curiosity getting the better of me. Before I could even say hello, James jumped right in. "Mom and Dad have been talking about making you the legal guardian for one of the boys when they're gone." I swear I almost dropped the phone. My heart was racing, and for a moment I just sat there, stunned. Was this some kind of joke? After all these years of barely being in my life, now they were going to dump this kind of responsibility on me? "What the hell are you talking about?" I finally managed to ask. James sighed, like I was the one being unreasonable. "You know how things are with Mom and Dad. They've got a lot on their plate with the boys, and they're not going to be around forever. They need to know someone's going to step up and take care of things when they're gone." I could feel my blood boiling. "And they think that someone is me? After everything? After all the ignoring and guilt-tripping, they just assume I'm going to drop everything and take over their mess?" James didn't seem to understand why I was so upset. "Look, I know it's a lot, but you're the only one who's stable. The rest of us, well, we've got our own issues." I almost laughed. "Yeah, well, maybe they should have thought about that before now. I didn't even know this was a thing." "They didn't tell you," he said, "but I figured you should know before they spring it on you." I was livid. This wasn't just about Christmas or Thanksgiving anymore. This was bigger. They were planning for the future, and they hadn't even thought to talk to me about it until now, when it was convenient for them. They hadn't been part of my life for years, and now they wanted me to step in as the responsible one? "No," I said firmly. "Just no." "So what? They've been discussing this behind my back?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around it. "Pretty much," James admitted. "They've been planning this for a while." I sat there in silence, staring at the wall, trying to process everything. Part of me wanted to scream at James, but I knew it wasn't really his fault. He was just the messenger. But that didn't change the fact that my parents were trying to screw me over in the biggest way possible. They weren't asking for a favor. They were asking me to dedicate the rest of my life to cleaning up after them. I was done being invisible, but I sure as hell wasn't going to become their backup plan now. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, feeling more defeated than angry at this point. "Drop my whole life and move back home? Give up everything I've worked for?" James didn't have an answer for that. He started going on about how hard things were for our parents, how they were struggling to manage everything with my brothers. But I didn't care. I had spent my whole life being pushed aside because I wasn't a problem. Now they wanted to use me because I was the only one who had my life together? It wasn't fair. "I'm not doing it," I said, cutting him off. "I'm not going to be their backup. They didn't care about me for the last 25 years, and they don't get to make me responsible for everyone now." James was silent for a second, then said, "I get it. I do. But you're still part of the family." That word, family, it made me want to scream. "Sure, I'm part of the family when it's convenient for them, but where were they when I needed help? When I was growing up, they didn't care if I was okay. But now that they're scared of the future, suddenly I'm the one they need?" "Tell them I'm not interested," I said. "And don't bother calling me about this again." I hung up before James could respond and sat there for a while, staring at my phone, trying to calm down. It felt like my whole life had been leading up to this moment where I finally had enough. Enough of the guilt trips, enough of the manipulative texts, enough of being ignored and then used. A few days went by without any contact from James or my parents. It was like they were waiting for me to come to my senses, to change my mind and be the good daughter they had suddenly decided I should be. But I wasn't budging. I wasn't about to let them dump their problems on me just because I was the only one left standing. Then, a letter came in the mail. It was from my mom. She hadn't even called. She just sent a letter like we were living in the 1800s or something. The letter was long and rambling, filled with the same guilt-tripping garbage I'd heard before. She went on about how much they needed me, how hard things were for them, and how they didn't know what they were going to do if I didn't step up. But what really pissed me off was the last part. My mom wrote, "We're not asking for much, Lily. We just need to know that when we're gone, someone will step up for the family." That's when it really hit me. This wasn't about me. It never had been. They didn't care about me. They cared about making sure someone cleaned up the mess they were leaving behind. They weren't trying to reconnect or build a relationship with me. They just wanted to make sure I'd take over when they couldn't handle it anymore. I crumpled up the letter and threw it in the trash. I was done. After that letter, I thought I had reached my limit. I mean, what else could they throw at me that I hadn't already seen? I dealt with their guilt trips, their manipulations, and their attempts to make me responsible for their problems. But of course, it wasn't over. Not even close. A week or two later, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something in me was curious. Maybe it was James calling from a new number, or maybe it was one of my parents trying to reach me since I'd been ignoring their texts. Either way, I picked up. "Hey, Lily, it's Megan." Megan is one of my sisters, though we were never really close. Growing up, she was always dealing with her own stuff, hospitals, therapists, all of it. I felt bad for her, but we were basically strangers living under the same roof, so hearing from her now, after everything, felt weird. Hey," I said, not sure where this was going. "Look," she started. "I know things have been rough between you and Mom and Dad, but I really need you to listen to what I'm going to say." I could already feel my stomach sinking. Here it comes, I thought. More guilt, more pressure to come back and fix everything. "What is it?" I asked, trying to sound neutral but already bracing myself for whatever crap was about to come. She took a deep breath, and then she said, "They're not doing well. Like, really not doing well. Dad's health is going downhill fast, and they're freaking out because no one's stepping up to help with the boys. They're scared, Lily. They don't know what to do." I didn't say anything for a second. It wasn't that I didn't care. I did. I didn't want to see anyone suffer, not even my parents. But after everything, after years of them not giving a damn about me, I couldn't just rush in and fix things for them. I wasn't their Band-Aid. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully, "but I can't just drop everything, Megan. I have a life, too." She sighed, and I could tell she was frustrated. "I get that, but you're the only one who's in a position to help. James is barely holding it together, and you know what's going on with me and the others. There's no one else, Lily." I could feel the anger bubbling up again. "They ignored this for years, Megan. They let it build up, thinking it would just go away. And now, because I'm the one who managed to get out and make something of my life, it's my responsibility? That's not fair, and you know it." "I know it's not fair," she said quietly, "but this is where we are. They need help." There it was again. The same story, the same guilt. No matter what I did, no matter how far I tried to move away from it, they always found a way to drag me back. I could feel the pressure building inside me, the frustration and resentment that had been simmering for years coming to a boil. "I'm not doing it," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I'm not going to be the one to clean up their mess. They didn't care about me when I was a kid, and they sure as hell don't get to come to me now just because it's convenient. I have my own life, and they need to figure this out on their own." I could hear the hurt in Megan's voice when she spoke again. "I get it, Lily. I really do. But this isn't about you or me. It's about the family. It's about what's going to happen to the boys when they're gone. If we don't step up, who will?" That hit me hard, not because I suddenly felt responsible, but because I realized just how trapped we all were. My parents had spent years neglecting me, pushing me aside, and now they were trying to use me as their escape plan. And my siblings? They were stuck in the middle of it all, just as trapped as I was. The only difference was that I had the strength to fight back, and they didn't. "I'm sorry," I said again, softer this time, "but I can't. I won't." There was a long pause, and I could feel the weight of her disappointment through the phone. But I wasn't going to cave, not this time. I couldn't. "Okay," she said finally, her voice flat. "I'll tell them." She hung up before I could say anything else, and I just sat there for a while, staring at my phone, feeling a mix of relief and guilt. I didn't owe my parents anything. I knew that. But still, it hurt. It hurt to know that my family was falling apart, and I was powerless to stop it. Or maybe I wasn't powerless. Maybe I just wasn't willing to sacrifice myself for them anymore. A few days later, I got another letter from my mom. This time, it was even worse. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She went straight for the guilt trip. She wrote about how disappointed she was in me, how I was letting the family down, how she couldn't believe I would turn my back on them in their time of need. She threw in a bunch of stuff about how hard it had been for her and my dad, how they'd sacrificed so much for us, and how she didn't know what she'd done to deserve a daughter who was so selfish. It was brutal. And for a second, it worked. I felt that old familiar sting of guilt, the same guilt I'd felt my whole life growing up. But then I remembered all the years I'd spent being invisible, all the times they'd forgotten about me, all the moments I needed them and they weren't there. And I realized that this wasn't about them needing help. This was about control. This was about them trying to pull me back into their web, trying to make me feel like I owed them something. But I didn't owe them anything. Not anymore. I crumpled up the letter and tossed it in the trash, just like the last one. I was done. Done being their pawn. Done letting them manipulate me. I had my own life now, and I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. The next day, I blocked their numbers. I blocked James, too, just to be safe. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only one that felt right. I couldn't keep letting them drag me down, keep making me feel like I was responsible for their problems. They made their choices, and now they had to live with them. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Blocking their numbers felt like a huge relief, like this weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in, well, maybe ever, I felt like I was in control of the situation. I wasn't sitting around, dreading the next guilt-tripping message from my mom or some random call from James. It was quiet. It was peaceful. But of course, that peace didn't last long. About 2 weeks after I blocked them, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I figured it might be a delivery. But when I opened the door, there she was. My mom, standing right there on my doorstep like she had every right to be there. I don't know how she found me. I mean, I hadn't exactly been hiding, but I didn't think she would just show up at my place like that. She looked different, older maybe, or just more worn down. Either way, I could tell things hadn't been easy for her. But here's the thing, I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, looking at me like she didn't recognize me. Finally, she spoke. "We need to talk, Lily." I sighed. "No, we really don't. I've said everything I needed to say. I've made my decision." She stepped forward like she was going to come in, but I stood in the doorway, blocking her. I wasn't about to let her inside and let this turn into another guilt trip. "Please, just listen," she said, her voice softer now. "Your father's getting worse. He's in and out of the hospital, and we don't know how much time he has left. I don't know what to do, Lily." There it was, the card she'd been waiting to play, the "your father is dying" card. She didn't say it outright, but I knew that's what she was hinting at. And listen, I'm not heartless. I didn't want my dad to suffer. But after everything they'd put me through, I couldn't just drop everything and rush to their side. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But this isn't my problem. You and Dad have had years to figure this out. You can't just show up now and expect me to fix everything." She looked at me like I had slapped her. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," she said, her voice trembling. "I just need you to be there for the family." "For the family?" I repeated, almost laughing. "What family? The one that ignored me for 25 years? The one that only talks to me when they need something? That's not a family, Mom. That's manipulation." Her eyes widened, and for a second I thought she was going to argue with me, but instead she just started crying. Right there on my doorstep. She broke down into tears, and I didn't know what to do. I wasn't going to invite her in, but I also couldn't just stand there and watch her cry. "Look," I said, my voice softening despite myself. "I get that this is hard for you. I really do. But I'm not your backup plan. I'm not the person who's going to come in and make everything okay. You made your choices, and now you have to deal with them." She wiped her eyes and looked up at me, and I could see the anger starting to replace the sadness. "We did the best we could, Lily. You don't understand what it was like, raising all of you, dealing with everything. We didn't have time for you because we were trying to keep everyone else alive. There it was, the excuse. The same excuse I'd heard a million times before. "And that's not my fault," I said, my voice firm now. "You made the choice to have 4 kids. You made the choice to focus on everyone else and leave me behind. That was your decision, not mine. And now you're trying to make me feel guilty for it? I won't do it, Mom. I won't." She stood there for a long time, not saying anything, just staring at me like she didn't know who I was anymore. And maybe she didn't. Maybe in her mind I was still that little kid she could ignore because I wasn't causing trouble. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I was done being invisible. Finally, comma. She spoke again. "So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on us?" I shook my head. "No, you turned your back on me a long time ago. I'm just finally walking away." She didn't have anything to say to that. She just turned and walked back to her car. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was sad, sure, but most of me just felt free, like I had finally let go of something I'd been carrying for years, something I should have let go of a long time ago. After she left, I went back inside and sat down, trying to process everything that had just happened. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was just done. Done with the guilt, done with the manipulation, done with the constant feeling like I wasn't enough. I wasn't going to be their backup plan. I wasn't going to be their last resort. I had my own life to live, and I wasn't going to let them drag me down anymore. The next few weeks were quiet. I didn't hear from anyone. No calls, no letters, nothing. And honestly, it was the best I'd felt in a long time. I focused on my work, my friends, my life. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next guilt-tripping message. I wasn't living in the shadow of their expectations anymore. And then, about a month later, I got an email. Not from my mom or dad this time, but from James. It was short, just a few sentences, but it said everything I needed to know. "Dad passed away last night. I thought you should know." I stared at the email for a long time, not really sure how to feel. I wasn't surprised. I knew this was coming, but I didn't feel sad either. I didn't feel much of anything, honestly. I thought about responding. I thought about calling James, asking how he was holding up, maybe offering my condolences. But then I realized this was just another step in the same cycle. Another chance for them to pull me back in, and I wasn't going to fall for it this time. I closed the email without replying and went on with my day. I wasn't part of their world anymore, and I was finally okay with that.